Again, I'm Margaret Lowe-Smith. I am the president of Atlantic Live. It is stunning to look around this room and to think about the enormous distance that people travel to be here. From cities across the country and around the world, we've heard the list, but it bears repeating. Cape Town, Seoul, Shanghai, and Mumbai. In this breathless technological age, when communication is instantaneous no matter the physical distance, real human action still matters. People want to listen to one another, learn from each other. People want to connect face to face. That you are all here in this room together is testament to that fact, and it is one of the enduring notions of Atlantic Live. And none of this would have been possible without the generous support of our underwriters. General Motors, Hitachi, HP, JP Morgan Chase, CH2M Hill, the J. Paul Getty Trust, Palantir, UCLA, and McKinsey & Company. Our thanks to you. I also want to thank our partners, Bloomberg Philanthropies and the Aspen Institute, for working with us at the Atlantic to bring CityLab to life. And with that, it is an enormous pleasure and a privilege to introduce to you the president and CEO of the Aspen Institute, Walter Isaacson, for a conversation with the mayor of this extraordinary city, Eric Garcetti. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Mayor, thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
It's really cool.
Great to be with you. Welcome, everybody.
Yes, this is our second CityLab, and it's an honor to be doing it in Los Angeles, especially because of the innovation you're doing. And I wanted to start with the notion of you being the CEO of the city, which is somewhat unusual. In the past 15 years, the LA City Charter has been changed. What does it mean to be a public CEO rather than, quote, a mayor?
Well, let me just start very, very briefly by welcoming everybody. If you're lucky enough to have been born here, congratulations. If you're visiting here, we couldn't be more excited to have you here, and thank Mike Bloomberg for what was just a great gathering last year, and I said we have to do this in LA, and so here we are. So thank you to everybody who's made this happen. You know, what was so useful last year for me is there's no real playbook for the public CEO. My fellow mayors and other people who are here who work in the public sector, the private sector has, I think, a strong curriculum, a tradition of mentoring and being mentored. Even the nonprofit world has that developed. But suddenly one day you read the city charter and it says you're the CEO of a $10 billion enterprise that runs things like ports and airports and water and power systems. Some of you might have heard this morning there was another water break on Sunset Boulevard, and you get the phone call in the early morning that there's something going on in your city. So it's something you really have to develop on your own, and CityLab has been a great part of that. Aspen Institute, the Rodell Fellowship that I did there as well, which brings half Democrat, half Republican young elected officials together. But I think the most important thing for me that I've learned just in the 14 months as mayor, as a public CEO, is, I don't often quote Ross Perot, but the one thing that transcends both public and private CEOs is he once said, I spend about 60% of my time trying to recruit good people, 30% of my time trying to retain them, and the rest of my job is 10%. now, as mayor, you have to respond to emergencies. And I think as a mayor, we often are not defined so much by the plans that we have, but the reactions to events that we didn't plan, that really define who you are to your people. You have to push your agenda forward, but it is the shooting at LAX that we had right around Thanksgiving last year. It's a main break that happens. It's a racist owner of an NBA team who says something silly. Those moments kind of define who you are to your city. So a public CEO is somebody who's known much more intimately than a private CEO. People own you. They've elected you. That's their city, and they want to know who you are.
You work for them.
Absolutely, and they want to know that you have the qualities that they can support.
But Michael Bloomberg is probably the only mayor I can think of who had actually been a CEO before becoming mayor. Yep. How hard is it, and what do you learn from a group from like Bloomberg Philanthropies of how to be a CEO when you actually get in the job?
Well, the network of mayors is the best convening that came together through CityLab last year, and I keep in touch with a number of them. I mean, Betsy Hodges, who's somewhere in here from Minneapolis, the class of 2013, we all went to the White House together in, I think it was December or November of last year, to meet with the president and the vice president, and went around the table for about an hour and a half just describing what was going on in our cities. And so when the Seattle mayor is working on minimum wage, and I've proposed raising the minimum wage here in Los Angeles as well, we're able to talk to each other about that and what is the experience and how do we lead a campaign like that. When Bill de Blasio is going through something, he will send me an email, vice versa, I'll do the same with him. Rahm Emanuel, he and I and Kasim Reed, who I think is also here as well from Atlanta, sat down to talk about how we learn from one another. And I think, somebody told me not to use the word thieves, so I'll change it. We're not thieves, but we are folks who find good examples, whether it's in Louisville, whether it's in, New York, whether it's in Chicago, and we basically try to transplant those best ideas from place to place. So the public CEO is very different. It's open sourced. Right. You're not competing against another company. Something you do well, it's more like what Elon Musk is doing with the Tesla, where he says, I'm going to make all of these plans available for everybody. That's the same thing here. A great idea in Shanghai may be in Los Angeles tomorrow and vice versa.
And so you can make this an open source, as the previous panel would say, peer-to-peer sharing.
Absolutely. In fact, the people demand that. You have to do it between mayors, but you also have to do it as a mayor, as a CEO of your city, with your workers, which is one audience, and then with your constituents.
Part of that process is data management, and you've been really drilling down on that. Given me an example of data management when it comes to, say, traffic mobility.
Well, data management is everything. And first of all, you have to build a good network. I mean, here in Los Angeles, for instance, two quick examples. One is that we have probably the most robust traffic sensor system in the world here. Just the synchronizing of lights based on that has reduced traffic or made it not get worse in Los Angeles by about 18%. We can quantify that, let people know, even when they're stuck in traffic, it would be 18% worse if we hadn't done that, and make decisions accordingly. That's considered success in Los Angeles. But we also, look at the challenges we face, and the speed of decision-making that people demand because of what they're used to in their personal communications and their e-commerce, et cetera, is elevated. And so any mayor or city that is in the analog age is really going to get burned. I'll give you an example. In Hollywood, where I was a council member, we rebuilt this very famous, maybe most famous neighborhood in Los Angeles. So we had a good problem, which was more traffic. People then demanded, well, build old analog system, a new parking structure. Well, I set out that day doing it. It only took me 7 years and $70 million to build 400 spaces. For $40,000, though, I was able to work with a company out of San Francisco, Streetline, and build a mesh network that put sensors in every single parking space on the street. And so when a car leaves with an app, we could find where a parking space was, because Don Shoup and others have looked at, 15% of the traffic was caused by people circling the block looking for a place to park. That was $40,000, a convenience that blew people away, that they could actually look on their phone or their tablet and find a parking space before they arrived. And again, it was sort of what was data management, but also the interpretation and the application of it in an intelligent way that, at the end of the day, made life easier for folks.
But as you look at mobility, is there anything transformative that the city of Los Angeles could do?
Absolutely. I want Los Angeles to be, as a CEO, there's a great a book that talks about the 3 horizons. Most of us are set in the first horizon, which is just doing what your business does. In our case, it would be managing the traffic system I have. Some progressive cities are doing the next piece, which is what's coming next. Here in Los Angeles, we're building out the biggest public transportation construction program in the country. 7 new lines linking up our airport finally, taking us from the ocean to downtown, which will open up late next year or beginning of 2016. Transformative for the car capital. But the book says you can't get stuck on the second. You have to actually be looking at the third horizon. And just talking about what's coming next at a conference doesn't count, or throwing it up on a whiteboard with your senior managers. So what does that look like in the city of Los Angeles? Well, while we're building out this rail network, we simultaneously should be looking at, I think, bus rapid transit lanes, not because BRTs are, of course, they're proven successful, but because autonomous vehicles are going to be here. How do you spend billions of dollars on fixed rail when we might not own cars in this city in a decade or a decade and a half? So we're working with UCLA to look at the area around UCLA and Westwood to say, could this be the first place really in an urban center where we have autonomous vehicles that are able to be ordered up like a shared car, a car service right away in a real neighborhood, not just in a protected area. And in preparing for that, a bus lane today may be a bus and autonomous vehicle lane tomorrow.
We were just talking in the previous panel about the peer economy. How does the peer economy, starting, let's say, with transportation, not only Uber, but all sorts of ways to share transportation, how does that affect the way you look at the city?
Well, it affects us tremendously, and I think culturally first and foremost, because there's something that's intimate about that kind of shared economy, where people feel like if you're at an Airbnb, you're actually staying in someone's home potentially. And I think they demand that same sort of intimacy with government, although government rarely gives it to them. Second, it's about convenience. We're working with some folks from Xerox, kind of the skunk work guys who brought us the mouse and everything else, to be the first big city, hopefully, that has, the option to be able to buy, let's say, $1,000 of transportation for the month. Now, through a single app, I could order a taxi, an Uber, Lyft sidecar, I could get on the bus, I could get on the rail, I could take out a shared bike, I could get a shared car, like a zip car or something like that. And you never have to stress out anymore about how you're going to get someplace. You know you have the options. You don't have to think about parking. You don't have to think about finding that parking space. But it's a single system. And maybe the city makes a small transaction fee off of that, or MTA. So it's actually in our interest to build that and then share that open source again with the rest of the world. It's time for us, I think, in this kind of peer-to-peer network, for folks to be able to provide lifts to each other, to be able to share their bikes with one another, to be able to do things which I think are very impressive in a number of parts of the world, where why do any of us own a leaf blower or a chainsaw? How often do we use that? Are we using that every day? No, but if you know somebody in your neighborhood has one, and you can get to them that one time every 2 years you need a chainsaw, or once a month when you need a leaf blower or something like that, that can be a much more efficient, effective way, not only of getting what you need, saving some money, but also building community.
Yeah, Brian Chesky at the previous panel and a couple of the other people mentioned that not just as a side benefit, but as a historical, almost transforming benefit, which is to bring a city like Los Angeles, where people are not exactly part of a civic community, and suddenly they're physically together, sharing things, doing things for each other, and it creates a new type of sense of community. Do you see that happening?
Absolutely. I mean, we have a strong initiative of mine, something called the Great Streets Initiative, which is to take the main streets of, Los Angeles is a collection of villages, 180 plus of them that make up the city of LA. These wonderful, unique places, many of which have their backbone almost broken, where the main part of the commercial strip is empty or just has a few, storefront churches. We want to transform each one of those, but building out hardscape takes 3-5 years to do. In the meantime, it is the programming of those spaces that we find builds community right away. When you can take a park like the Grand Park, which is around the Civic Center, and bring a big event like Made in America, Jay-Z's music festival that we had here on Labor Day weekend. There was a lot of fear about that because LA's never done that in the urban core, and it was a wild success. It brought people together. Or whether it's some of the pop-up culture that you all can see hopefully maybe last night and then tonight along Broadway here in Los Angeles, where you can see along the streets people are going to be climbing and art that's going to be projected and all sorts of things that give a sense of excitement to place. That can be done by a mayor, that can be done by a city right away. And I think the biggest changes we've made are these kind of urban acupuncture points that have transformed the health of the entire neighborhood just by adding a little dynamism, a little energy through the programming of a parklet, through the programming of some cultural space, through Ciclavia, which if you guys want to stay, and I encourage you, stay an extra week, but next weekend on Sunday, it's now the largest open space in America. It's something 10 times bigger than Central Park when we close down to cars, and we get 50,000 cyclists who come from very distant points now in the metro region to be able to just enjoy what we have abundance of, which is great weather, great culture, great eating out on the street.
As I listen to you, this is helping feed something Los Angeles, if I may say so, has never really had very well, which is a civic culture, which is everybody feels like they're part of one civic culture. How do you as a mayor build on these type of neighborhood things and create, maybe using social media, a real civic culture in a city that's been sort of more fragmented?
Well, mayors, I always like to think of us as kind of watching those model boats in a lake. If you go up there and you try to lift the boat and shove it through the water, it's not going to go. But if you notice the boats are going the wrong direction, what we do is we kind of tap them in the right direction. And there's a really robust desire in Los Angeles for culture, just like any place. But you're right, Los Angeles' old reputation, we're all stuck in cars and traffic by ourselves, we live in our homes, don't know one another. But we're very generous people. We've got the best weather on the face of the earth. We've got interesting topography that takes you from surfing to skiing in the same day. And so what we're trying to build now is a sense of interconnectedness. That's done through hardscape. That's done through a better public transportation system. That's done through these pop-ups and reviving the main streets of our neighborhoods. But it's also done by giving people an opportunity to participate in the turnaround of their city. As mayors, we always get asked, I want to do something for my neighborhood. I want to do something for my city. What can I do? And we're building a platform for volunteerism here in Los Angeles that will plug you in by your zip code and by your interest to getting involved in a neighborhood, whether it's turning around a school, whether it's getting engaged in taking a veteran off the street who's homeless. And building that culture, I think, is critical. Cities around America, every paper, if you look at it, are being criticized because our voter turnout is lower and lower and lower each year. It's not, in LA, people thought it was just LA. Then we compared, it was worse in San Antonio, it was equal in Seattle. I mean, the turnout is terrible because we don't do a lot to build civic activism in between. And I do think social media is a huge part of it. I think it's getting people involved and engaged in real victories. We've been talking for 30 years about revitalizing the LA River. When we give people the chance to advocate directly, to sign petitions, to get engaged and involved, it helped us push a plan through Washington that gave us $1 billion to revitalize that river that was considered dead just a few months before. And the Army Corps of Engineers said they had never gotten so many public comments for. Only one person was against it, and they had literally thousands of people for it. And that gives people a victory, and they say, what's next?
How do you inculcate and continue to nurture an innovative culture within City Hall?
It has to be both top and bottom. I think I've tried to, on my managers, figure out how we can, the general managers, or as they call them, the New York commissioners and our chiefs, said you have to be able to, follow from the front. And for the worker down in the trenches, I want them to be able to lead from the line. I spend time every week calling line workers. I tell my staff, collect good stories. I want to know about the firefighter who burned his hand saving someone's lives. I want to know about the guy in Rec and Parks, great example, who was so frustrated. He'd only been working a couple of years. He was in charge of all the HVAC systems, all the air conditioning systems. And he noticed that they were on all the time, even when nobody was playing in our rec centers. He said, drove him crazy from an efficiency standpoint. And he asked permission. They said, no, it takes too long. We'll never get it done. Just let them run. So on his own dime, on his own time, he went to the hardware store, got a switch that people can hit on the way out of the gym. And if they forget to hit it, he put a timer on it so it shuts off automatically. And when it was installed, people thought he was a hero. We are putting that in every rec center in Los Angeles, and it'll save us $500,000 the first year. I called him and thanked him. I put him in my first State of the City address and had him stand up because I knew that culture would begin to spread. And you have to create a culture of innovators. You can bring CompStat, which we're doing, into every single department, which is great for accountability.
But if you don't, CompStat?
CompStat is, the measurement of statistics, specific goals, and driving people towards accountability towards those goals. Used a lot in policing, but hadn't been used in any other departments really in Los Angeles. So we've got a bark stat for our animal services now that collect data on everything that we can then use to make better policy to kill fewer animals.
Are those open? Could I find it?
Absolutely.
Could I go right online now?
My second executive directive was an open, my Samsung here, yes.
Sorry.
Don't worry, we love iPhones too, but I want to make sure I get my branding in for Samsung. We have open data directive. And I attracted a great innovator from Qualcomm to be our first Chief Innovation and Technology Officer, Peter Marks. And so he and others are overseeing now a culture that everything we collect, we now share. Whether it's for the app producer, whether it's for the media to have accountability, or whether it's for the citizen to know where her money is being spent, it's really critical for us to be able to do that. And it's resulting in innovation. When you asked how do you get innovation, armed with data, the citizen and the line worker can actually figure things out. Our sanitation workers now have tablets to make sure they're going to the right places because somebody out there said, I use this every day in my life. All of us experience much better technology outside of government than inside, and yet we go to work every single day. That firefighter who says, why can I buy this on Amazon this way? Why can I talk to somebody on Skype that way? And here you want me to drive all the way downtown for a training? That caused a lot of traffic, a lot of money, and so they have become the innovators, and we've created innovation teams for the first time in the city of Los Angeles, building on with Bloomberg Associates and others what Mike did in New York and other mayors have done around the country.
And how do you build on that to bring it to scale to make a city that's more sustainable?
Well, the sustainable part of it is we all know the great force multiplier is our citizens. 40,000 employees that I have, $10 billion budget is great. But 4 million people, and even more than that, our metro area is 12 million, so I've engaged with all of my mayors in the county, is we're trying to march towards that same direction. And more than having a fixed vision, we've created a new way for people to bring their ideas in and create that vision together. And I can't underscore that enough. If people don't feel a part of that process, you can change as much of the technology as you want. but if they see their idea actually getting onto the street, you've won them over as a participant for life.
Last question. You are a fellow of the Aspen Institute's Rodell program, half Democrats, half Republicans. There's been a total fracturing of our political system, yet at the city level, it doesn't seem to be happening. Why?
Because we have to, I don't have a choice about that water main break today. That has to be solved. We don't have the luxury of inaction. We don't have the luxury of partisan politics. And quite frankly, I can meet a Republican mayor, I happen to be a Democrat, and we can have a conversation. We can talk to mayors who aren't part of Republican or Democratic Party. It was with Mayor Paes from Rio de Janeiro last week at the C40 meeting that we had, which is on climate change. And we just speak the same language. We speak in accountability and the book that Ben Barber has, it's true. If mayors ruled the world, I think a lot would get done.
Yep. Well, as Mayor Bloomberg said, cities are where solutions happen.
Absolutely.
Mr. Mayor,
thank you. And welcome to LA. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.